In 1905, a photograph captured the moment when a young Ho-Chunk woman looks at the camera in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. The portrait shows her wrapped in a fringed plaid shawl, a piece that seems to carry memory and belonging. In the records, the girl has a name and a story, Kate Thunderminer, whose image crosses time and still speaks to us. In 1894, a photograph records a woman from the Kiowa Nation. The framing first draws attention to the smile, a point of light that guides the eye. From there, the scene comes to life. Calm features, a steady presence, a moment of joy that crosses time. In that simple gesture, the image reveals bonds, memories, and the strength of a culture that endures. In 1907, the camera records Lucille, a Dakota Sioux woman, and invites us to look beyond the portrait. She appears in traditional clothing where beaded necklaces and crafted bracelets trace history on the body. The framing moves in on her face. There rests the memory of her people, a calm that signals the strength of heritage and the continuity of those who came before and those who will come. In 1906, the photographer George Bancroft photographed Cow-oo-Teets, a woman of the Caddo people. The image, direct and quiet, works as an invitation. Behind the portrait, the memory of the plains of the southeastern United States and this people's path emerges. As we meet her gaze, we follow a thread that links presence, land, and history, and it reminds us that cultures endure. In 1908, a portrait of Awe-Ayu, known as Pretty Flower, a member of the Seneca Nation, captures a moment that crosses time. The image invites us to observe not only the face but signs of her culture, opening a path to a careful reading of Seneca life and the historical context that shaped it. By uniting memory and presence, the portrait brings past and present closer. In 1910, a young Kalispel woman appears on the scene and opens a window into her people's world. Her presence carries us to landscapes, rituals, and memories that shaped lives in the Pacific Northwest. It's not just a portrait, it's an invitation to understand the strength of a community that preserves ancient roots and keeps moving forward. The story starts here, but it echoes to this day. The chief's heiress presents Lodiki Yatere, a young woman of the Pueblo Nation in New Mexico. The image, made in 1905 by Carl Moon, reveals features and adornments that echo her heritage. By fixing that instant, the photographer records not just a face, but an act of cultural continuity, inviting the eye to recognize the history running through the photograph. This photograph captures the princess of the Umatilla tribe in Northwest Oregon and invites us back to 1900. More than a portrait, it is a record of presence and dignity. The click is by Major Lee Morehouse, then a keen visual chronicler of his time who traveled the region documenting people and ways of life that rarely found a voice. Goldie Jamison Conklin, a Seneca woman from the Allegheny Reservation, played a central role in indigenous life in the early 20th century. A 1910 photograph records her steady gaze and the posture of someone who carries a collective story. In it, every feature suggests the memory of her people and the continuity of a tradition that crosses generations. Around her, time seems suspended. Juanita Buck, a Dakota Sioux woman from the 1880s, emerged as a reference in her community. In a time of change and pressure on her people, her path became living testimony to what endured and what transformed. Respected for her connection to Sioux rights and memories, she linked past and future, preserving paths for the next generations. In 1910, a young Kiowa woman walked across the Great Plains as a bridge between past and future. Her presence held her people's stories and guided the community's daily life. Between rituals, work, and learning, young women took on essential tasks, sustaining traditions, uniting families, and keeping alive the memory that shaped their steps. Firstborn daughter of the Apache leader Geronimo, Lena was born in 1886 within the walls of Fort Marion in Florida. While her father waited, imprisoned, she came into the world, marking the family with an unlikely beginning. The cradle inside a fort became a symbol of a story where captivity and hope walked together. The scene lays bare the clashes of the period and opens a chapter that echoes. In 1939, a photograph records June Welch, a young Cherokee woman dressed in traditional attire. More than a portrait, the frame reveals layers of memory, the craft of hands that weave, symbols that cross generations, and the affirmation of a people. In the calm of her gaze, a thread remains alive, linking past and future, a promise of continuity and cultural resistance. In 1908, a photograph captured a young woman of the Sioux Nation. The portrait, direct and moving, showed her in traditional dress, revealing the ways and symbols of her community. By fixing her gaze and posture, the image crosses time and invites those who see it to recognize a living history made of memory, resistance, and identity, past and present. In 1910, Anna Kaskakash wore ceremonial cayuse pieces, each element carrying stories of the land and the people. As she walked, collective memory seemed to pulse in the beads and fabrics. But the tide of the West was advancing, pressing on customs and knowledge, and the community searched for ways to keep its voice alive without letting go of the thread of tradition. Around 1900, Minnie Lou Ottinger Bradley moves through a world in transition. Her path, marked by everyday life and major events, shows how the turn of the century reshaped habits, ideas, and opportunities. Amid political debates, new customs, and technical advances, she watches the future take shape, and she leaves traces of the time to come. In 1910, a photograph invites us to meet an Arapaho woman. On the plains of North America, her traditional attire reveals a story of belonging and resistance. The frame is not just a record, it's a starting point to remember the presence of the Arapaho people and how the culture stayed alive at that time, an echo that crosses generations. Early 20th century, across the Southwest, Apache women turned fibers into history. Basketry, the result of knowledge passed down, was born from gathering, dyes, and carefully planned weaves. Each piece served daily life and marked identities, uniting technique and memory. To look at these baskets is to hear the voice of a community in motion. Alice was born in the early 20th century. Her indigenous origin remains uncertain, with clues linking her to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla peoples. The lack of records doesn't erase her trail. Her story crosses these nations, and in this meeting of roots, her memory gains a voice and inspires new questions about the place she held. The silence of the archives keeps the riddle alive. Born in 1886, Julie Nelson came from a Native American lineage. She grew up among stories, rituals, and crafts that set the village's rhythm. The land wasn't just scenery, it gave meaning, food, and direction. By following in her people's footsteps, she kept alive practices and values that crossed generations, keeping the community together. Her daily life reflected collective choices and respect for ancestors. An unnamed young woman dominates the scene, carefully balancing her bowls while the gesture holds the eye. Made during the Platino-type period, the photograph shows the strength of that process, with muted tones that draw silence and presence in a dialogue between light and weight. The author is Adam Clark Vroman, who turned a simple moment into memory. Sawatanyuk, a young woman of the Kwakwakawaku Nation, grew up among rituals, songs, and crafts of the Northwest Coast. Around 1914, her routine was intertwined with the tides and the village's cycles. By learning from elders and taking part in ceremonies, she helped keep alive the collective memory and the strength of an inheritance passed from generation to generation. A photo from the late 19th century shows a young Lakota woman. More than a record, it opens a portal to the habits, symbols, and stories of the people. Her steady gaze leads the eye, her clothing marks the time, and each detail suggests life in motion. As we look, we cross eras and draw closer, with respect to the one portrayed and the culture that shaped her. A portrait catches the eye. Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman captured by Frank Reinhardt around 1898. The pause of the shutter carries across decades and invites us to move forward. By observing her presence and the details of her attire, we see a meeting point between memory and identity, a window that helps us understand a people's practices, values, and paths. Marcia Pascal appears as a bridge between memories and identities. Her path begins in the legacy of Lieutenant Colonel George W. Paschal, a presence that marks the family's history. Alongside that thread runs the Cherokee tradition, which guides values and belonging. Between these lines, she builds who she is and where she intends to take her story. In an early 20th century photograph, a young indigenous woman appears whose identity has been lost. Her traditional clothing indicates belonging and collective memory. The framing suspends the instant. Between the studio's silence and the echoes of her people, the image preserves an unlikely meeting between the past and the present gaze. Nameless, she crosses time. Julia Ann Keika of the Umatilla Nation appears in a photograph from 1880. The framing invites us to meet her face and with it a story that crosses generations. As we observe the image, we draw closer to Umatilla culture and the period's context, recognizing a presence that resists time and preserves collective memory and living traditions. Atra Asan, or Bertha Thompson, carries a lineage that records trace from 1914 on. Daughter of Milton James Thompson and Chinawa, a woman of the Yurok people, her path shows how names and documents intertwine to tell where she came from. By following these clues, we see her roots and the path that shaped her story. A photograph from the early 20th century takes us to a field on the outskirts of Sheridan, Wyoming. In the foreground, a woman of the Crow Nation looks firmly at the camera. The dress with elk teeth, the leather belt, and the beaded necklaces reveal belonging and memory. Between wind and light, her presence stitches together land and time. Zitkalasa, Redbird in Lakota, turned her own story into political force. By writing, she narrated experiences and conflicts that ran through her identity, inviting readers to face the clash between worlds. Her work opened paths for indigenous cultures to be better understood and respected, echoing beyond her community. In 1888, a striking photograph appears. Lily Mae Smith Tucker faces the lens. Daughter of Nimrod Jarrett Smith and a descendant of the Cherokee people, she condenses in one portrait the memory of an era. As we observe her features and posture, we glimpse choices, pressures, and ties that shaped that generation, an invitation to revisit that past with care. In 1890, in Cheyenne, in western Oklahoma, a young woman goes through her morning routine, crosses the dirt street, passes wooden shops, helps at home, watches the train that rarely comes by. The town, still guided by a rural rhythm, breathes calm. Modernization moves ahead elsewhere, but there it arrives slowly, like news late in the afternoon. In 1880, Inusk stands out in the story of the Kickapoo people. Daughter of the respected chief, she embodies the bridge between tradition and future, preserving rites, stories, and forms of leadership that shape the community. Her role reaffirms collective identity and keeps alive the legacy that sustains the tribe's social and spiritual life day to day. Around 1900, the camera fixes on the face of an indigenous teenage girl, a member of one among many native nations of North America. The click crosses time. From the early 20th century to us, it reveals habits, clothing, and presences, and invites us to imagine the daily life and forms of resistance that sustained those ancestral communities. In 1923, Ada Lopez Richards of the Tolowa Nation emerges as a living portrait of a Native woman's experience in the United States. Her path, linked to coastal communities of California and Oregon, invites a close look at Tolowa ways of life and the changes that crossed indigenous peoples in the early 20th century in that period. In 1909, in White Cloud, Kansas, the lens records Nora Barada Murphy. A prominent member of the Iowa people, she carries a story that runs through the ancestral territories of Kansas and Nebraska. The portrait, direct and calm, reveals her steady presence and invites the eye to recognize the continuity of that memory and her place in the community. In 1892, a young Kiowa woman draws attention. The dress she wears, made in her people's style, carries beads and fringes that tell stories. As she walks, she carries the elders' voices and the memory of the land. Her presence links past and future and invites those who see her to notice that tradition is a living path, not a distant memory. Around 1900, Josefa Rios of the Tohono O'odham Nation, also known as Papago, became a respected figure among her people. With a firm voice and attentive steps, she organized gatherings, taught rituals, and recorded memories, keeping alive the thread that links the young to ancient knowledge and ensuring that the community's story moved forward. In 1899, Seattle turned its eyes to a young woman of the Yakima Nation known as La Roche. Her presence crossed borders, the modern city and ancestral heritage. The strength of her origin and the charisma of youth made her a notable figure, a living symbol of Yakima culture and a remembered figure in the social life of that time. A link between worlds. Around 1904, a photograph records a Navajo woman. The frame moves in on her face, where an open smile reveals confidence and life. In the background, settings and clothing of the period appear as clues to daily life, connecting the viewer to history. The image, simple and direct, preserves memory and presence. In a few strokes, the portrait links culture, affection, and time. In 1898, a photograph captures a young woman of the Assiniboine Nation. The portrait leads us to the historical setting of her people, revealing traits of identity and the time in which she lived. Without adornment, the image focuses the eye on the essential, the meeting between person and era, letting us perceive in silence the memory that remains there.